How are you? High pressure. I know. My little assistant, yes, Menucha. Everyone say hi to the baker. Whoever likes the brownies, Menucha made them and the cookies. Yes.
No, can just ask him.
Because once it's like that, whoever's coming now is coming. They're coming for the class. You wait like 2 minutes. I'm on my way 2 minutes. Like that's kind of. I'm on. Okay, I'm on. Those that are watching online, my cutest little kids, little fundraisers in training. This is totally their idea. So 100%, they cooked it. They did everything. They packed it. They found bags. Yeah. I was just a photographer for them. Yeah, they're the big kids, and it's good. On the Uber, yeah. Baruch Hashem. It's good. It's nachas because they're doing it for a good cause, and it's a beautiful thing. Baruch Hashem. Okay. If you're watching on Chabad.org, say hi. It'd be great to say hi so I can see who's watching. And Kim said, I don't see Kim. I don't see. Hold on one second. What are we live on? Am I only live on Raise? Hold on one second. Facebook. Okay. Oh, now I see. Okay, Kim, I see your comment. Hello, Kim. Good evening, Ravit. You're missing the brownies. Okay, Art Shavua Tov. Shavua, we have people watching on all channels. So we are ready to begin, my friends. Part 2 of this fascinating story. Of course, you all know the destruction of the temple. Oh, we got a special treat. Look at this. How are you? So, my friends, they came for the brownie. Maybe they didn't even come for the class. Look at that. Okay, Michael Shalom. So, my friends, let us begin. So, we were learning about the destruction of the siege of Jerusalem and the breaching of the walls. And we began last week by quoting a statement in the Talmud. And the Talmud says that the first Beit HaMikdash, the first temple, was destroyed. Why? Because idol worship and immorality, adultery, murder. We were behaving in immoral ways. We were not behaving properly. And God got upset at us. And we had multiple warnings from multiple prophets that we need to change our behavior. And didn't listen. So because we didn't listen, the temple was destroyed and we lost our temple. Okay. That was temple number 1. Says the Talmud in Yoma, why was the second Beit HaMikdash destroyed? The Jews in the second temple were much more religious. They're much more righteous. They were not acting in sinful ways. They weren't doing things that were immoral and improper. So why was the second temple destroyed? Because of senseless hatred. Because of sinas chinam. As Michelle said, we couldn't get along. And because we couldn't get along with each other, therefore, we lost the second temple. And so I wanted you to understand the history. What does it mean? It's not just a statement of the rabbis we couldn't get along. It wasn't just a statement. It's easy to make, statements. This was the political and sociological reality of the Jews living in Israel at that time, where they literally could not get along. Good evening, Alice. Good evening, Miyakel. And therefore, because they couldn't get along, we lost the temple. So I wanted to go through the history. We started last week talking about the end of the Hashmona'i dynasty and how King Herod, I'm not going to repeat all the details of last week, but eventually King Herod became the king, and then Antipater, who was the advisor, he was before Herod. All the discussions, and the Jewish people have now invited Rome into Israel. And because we couldn't get along, and you had the two before even Herod, you had the two factions, Hyrcanus and we're going from memory now. The two sons. I should look back. The brothers, correct, who couldn't get along, and so three factions come to the Romans to asking them to come and mediate, so to say, between them. And of course, it doesn't end very well. The Romans come in. I think it's Hyrcanus I may be wrong in the names now, is taken into oh, hello, Eric, how are you? Is taken into captivity. And once the Romans, I went through the whole story last week. It's a terrible story. And we ended last week with the Romans, with eventually, there was a civil war, Pompey took over, and I went through all those details. And eventually we ended, is that the Jewish people are now living under terrible Roman oppression. You have the Roman tax collectors who are ruthless. They were as wicked could be. All they cared about was money and taxing the Jewish people, but they also had tremendous power. They could do whatever they wanted. And so they did many, many wicked, terrible things to the Jewish people. The authority of the Jewish people was, they were vassals of the Roman government. There wasn't even Jewish kings anymore. Herod was barely a Jewish king. But after that, there was no more Jewish kings. It was just Roman governors and tax collectors in each province. Each city had its own tax collector, literally doing whatever they wanted, causing tremendous destruction and pain for the Jewish people. And the Jews became very divided. How do we fight against the Romans? And this is basically what we're holding in the story. And again, the civil war between the Jews and the infighting, and not just the disagreements where we can disagree that I politically think we should do this and you think that. I say vote for Trump and you say vote for, I don't know, Kamala Harris. But not as we disagree, where the hatred of those that you disagreed with became so intense, so terrible, that hatred led to the fighting that was worse than what the Romans did. And that's what we're going to talk about today, leading up to the actual destruction of the second temple. Okay, so you have the Zealots. The Zealots, we talked about this a little bit last week, but we'll review. The Zealots are the ones that are the hotheads. They're full of fire, and they say, we got to destroy the Romans. We got to fight for our independence. Look at the story of the Maccabees. Look at the story of Jews in other difficult situations where it seemed like they were helpless. And what happened? They prevailed. And so that's the mindset of the Zealots. They were religious. They were righteous. They were believers in God. They were also idiots, which sometimes is helpful to be. And they were in denial or delusional about their chances fighting the Roman Empire, but they really believed that we need to fight no matter what. Then you had the moderates, or we can call them the mainstream, the rabbis, the more level-headed leaders of the Jewish people, who recognize we can call it the stupidity and the improbable likelihood of the Jews ever winning against the Romans, even though it had happened before, but they didn't think it was going to happen. And therefore, as a result of that, they decided to continue fighting. They said we have to negotiate with the Romans. We have to accept the Romans. And whatever the Romans like, we got to accept the reality, pay the taxes, but they'll leave us alone. Because the Romans were not anti-Jewish. It's important to understand they will become anti-Jewish. But at this point in the story, Rome is not really fighting against the Jews per se as Jews. They're fighting for one of their many provinces to pay taxes and to do whatever they want them to do. As long as the Jews pay taxes and didn't fight the tax collectors, they'll be happy. And then, of course, you had a faction of the Jews who were actually in with the Roman government, and they were making money off of this. And of course, they were, so the Zealots were tying together the moderates with the friends of Rome who are trying to make money. And the friends and the moderates are saying, you're destroying the land of Israel, you're committing suicide. And you can imagine each side thought that the other side was crazy. Each side thought the other side was delusional. It's not going to happen. And so we have at that time a Roman tax collector, a Roman governor, more than a governor over the land of Israel. His name is Florius. Florius is a very, very wicked man. And he's not just money hungry, he's also wicked. He's sadistic, he's evil, he's cruel, he has power, and he uses his power in very, very bad ways. And he kept taxing the Jews. And at one point, he decided he wants the wealth from the temple. And so he started demanding that the temple had, every year, everyone had to donate to the temple. Half shekel, etc., for all the offerings. He starts demanding the money from the temple. And the Zealots actually started walking around with charity boxes, like mocking Florius, like we're collecting, tzedakah, poor Florius needs a donation, this wealthy governor of the land of Israel, mocking him. And at one point, they stopped him from going in. And so Florius calls his troops to go and to raid the temple. They come in to raid the temple. And at first, the Jews, they were going to fight. The rabbis came to try and stop the Jews from fighting against Florius, helped for a little bit. But when Florius' men actually went to the temple, the Jews led a counterattack, killed Florius' army. He had to retreat. And this began the second revolt against the Romans. Okay? And you can imagine Florius, who was not killed, his soldiers were killed, was deeply, deeply hurt and offended and angry at what the Jews did. He writes to Rome, there's an insurrection, the Jews need to be sent in the army, we need to destroy the people of Israel. He was happy to kill them, to destroy them, because he was angry that they had mocked him and rebelled against him, etc. Now, at the same time that Florius is sending this letter asking the Romans to send in an army and destroy what he's calling the Jewish rebellion, is the story that I mentioned last week of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. The story of a wealthy man who had a friend called Kamsa, and an enemy called Bar Kamsa, and by mistake, his servant, when he was making a big party, instead of inviting the friend called Kamsa, he mixed up the mail, and instead he gave the invitation to Bar Kamsa. And when Bar Kamsa came to the party, when the host, who hated this man, saw him there, he got angry at him, said, "What are you doing here?" Wanted to throw him out of the party. He said, "Please don't embarrass me. I'll pay for my meal." He insisted. He said, "I'll pay for half the party. Don't embarrass me." He started screaming at him, "Get out of my party." He said, "I'll pay for the whole party." They threw him out in the presence of the rabbis. At that time, this man was so angry, he said, "I'm going to the Romans to get my revenge, not just against this wealthy man who kicked me out of his house, but my revenge against all the Jewish leaders and the rabbis in the community that were all present, all the big, the who's who and the machers were sitting there, and they watched my embarrassment and didn't do anything to defend my glory. I'm going to go and get my revenge." And so at this time, Rome is getting the messages from the Jews. And we talked about the whole story. They sent the sheep. He nicked the lip, right? And there was one of the rabbis there who didn't want Bar Preda, didn't want to allow a sheep with a blemish to be allowed on the altar. He also didn't want to allow the rabbis to kill this Bar Kamsa because it's not the law. You don't get killed for bringing a blemished animal to the temple. Not realizing that this man was literally endangering the lives. It's going to be over 1 million Jews we're going to talk about. Okay, so war begins. And the Roman army advances. And as they're advancing towards Israel, towards Jerusalem, they destroy everything in their path. Everything. They killed the farmers and the villagers, and they looted, and they burnt down the fields and the farms. And as they're coming through, all the survivors of the Galilee and the cities that are being attacked by the invading Roman army flee towards Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, so to say, becomes the absorption of all of the survivors of the Roman invasion from all over the land of Israel. So you have a mass swelling. I don't know how many people lived in the city of Jerusalem before the war began, but now you have over 1 million immigrants, refugees, not immigrants, refugees. The city is packed. The city of Jerusalem is packed, and there's no space for them. There's nowhere to live. There's no food for them. It's a very, very, very difficult situation. And amongst them is a man called John of the Geshachla, etc. And here too, in the city of Jerusalem, we have, as the war makes people even more intense and more polarized, and the disagreement between the Jewish community, how to deal with the threat of the Romans, instead of trying to work together in a time of war, in a time of a Roman invasion, the divisions between the Jewish people will become only more pronounced, more intense. And again, you have Jews in Jerusalem who say, "We've got to fight the Romans. We're going to fight back." And you have many other Jews in the city of Jerusalem who said, "Look at the army." If I'm not mistaken, I read that there were 60,000 troops coming in under Vespasian, an army of 60,000 men. How are you going to fight 60,000 men? You have no chance. And huge civil war. And eventually there's a full-fledged civil war going on within Jerusalem. Listen to this. Jerusalem had different levels in the city. The upper city, the lower level of the city. There are walls in the city. And the Sicarii were considered the zealots. They took control of the lower city. And the rabbis, the modern, had control over the temple, the higher city. And there was this huge war going on. A war, an actual war with people Jews killing each other in the city of Jerusalem. Until eventually came a week when they would bring the wood to the temple. One of the minor as a holiday was when they would bring the wood to the temple for the burning, for the altar. There were different days on the year when they would officially bring wood to the temple. Be a whole procession. It was a big honor, a big mitzvah to be able to provide the firewood that will be used on the altar. And so there was a group of Sicarii. Sicarii was part of the zealots. The zealots are the ones that want to fight against the the Romans. But of course, in every political group, I'm not getting into the main, the nitty gritty of the politics, but like in any political group, even today, right? You have, I don't know, any party. I don't get into party. You have tons of factions, right? And you have more extreme, more in every political party in the world. You have. So you have within the Zealots an extreme faction of the Zealots called the Sicarii, and they were so called because they would carry these little daggers, which are called Sicarii, in their cloaks, and they killed anyone that disagreed with them. Jews, they're religious Jews. These are religious Jews with religious fervor. They were all religious. I don't even understand that the Jewish people at this time, it was a religious Torah. They had the temple. They were using the temple. They were following the rabbis. The rabbis were leaders, except to the Zealots who did listen to the rabbis. That's what a Zealot is, right? They don't listen to authority and to people in positions of leadership. They're smarter. They're more hot-headed. So the Sicarii, who were very, very violent, they hid with these Jews going up to the temple. When they got to the temple, they pulled out their daggers and they killed thousands of Jewish men. 6,000 Jews were killed by the Sicarii. They set fire to the palace of the high priest and the office of the Roman tax office near the temple, and they took over control over the city. Michelle's having a hard time. Okay, so what do the Romans do? The Romans that were in the upper city, where the rabbis were killed, they respond by inciting the non-Jews, and there's another pogrom, and tens of thousands of Jewish men and women and children are murdered during this civil war with the Sicarii, etc., fighting for internal control over the city of Jerusalem. Okay. Now, it gets worse. It gets worse. You're not going to like the next part of the story. The Jews are stuck in Jerusalem. Vespasian has created this huge siege with 60,000 soldiers outside of the city. You have well over 1 million Jews trapped inside the city. Again, Jerusalem it's not that big of a city. Over 1 million Jews are trapped there. You're going to see the number, it's a lot of Jews. And Rome is outside, but the Jews are fighting inside. Right? Rome is fighting on the outside. But the Talmud says us, this is going to be a sad story. The Gemara in Gittin, page 56a, tells us that even though the Jews were trapped inside, they had enough food. They could have survived the siege for 21 years. They could have. They had food. They had 3 storage houses. Says the Gemara that there were 3 men. One was Nakdimain ben Gurion, one was ben Kalba Savua, and one was ben Tzitzis Hakesas. One of them had a storage house of wheat and barley. And he said, I will open up my storage houses, all my supplies, and I will feed anyone in the city of Jerusalem that needs wheat or barley. I will provide from my storage. Kalba ben Savua, he was known, he was a man, Kalba is a dog. Savua means to be satisfied. He would feed poor people. They would walk out of his house full like a dog, smacking their lips, feeling like a dog, like, oh, that was a good meal. That's how generous he was. And he said, I'm going to feed anyone that needs. I have storage houses of wine, salt, oil. I'll take care of everyone's needs. And the third, he had storage houses of wood. He said, I'll give firewood to anyone in the city that needs. Talmud actually says to don't let the firewood is a bigger, because the amount of firewood you need to cook the food that he was giving. Anyway, so the city had resources, and it was not doomed to immediate famine. Now, what's the problem if the people are not dying of hunger yet? The Biryonim, which is the other Talmudic name for these zealots, these rebels, they wanted the Jews to fight. And they were convinced that if a good Jew has to fight the Romans, if you're not willing to fight, there's a problem. The problem is that many Jews didn't want to fight, and the Jews wanted to surrender and be able to live under Roman rule, but to live. And so what do the Biryonim, these zealots, what do? They burnt down the storage houses. And they induced the famine of the siege to force the Jews into a state of desperation where they would join the ranks of the zealots to fight against the Romans. And so instead of having supplies for 21 years, they only had supplies for 3 years. They lost 18 years worth of supplies because of the fires created by the zealots to force the Jews into a fight and a war against the Romans. It's a horrific story. This is what happens when you're so convinced that you're right that There's no stopping you. Once you're convinced that no matter what, you're right, no matter what, then that's what you're holding. So, no, not at all. This is destruction. This is a terrible. First of all, destruction is a sin. Baltashchis. No, the Zealots made a big mistake. They made a big mistake. Good evening, Shira. Shalom. Good evening, Heidi. Good evening, Joseph. Good evening, Carmen. They made a huge mistake. Terrible mistake. This is what we call extremism, right? Extremism is destructive. There was a point to the Zealots' perspective. We should have faith in God, and God will take care of us. But the moment that you allow your faith to become zealotry and extremism, and that's dangerous. So the Jews wanted to negotiate with the Romans. So they didn't want the Jews to negotiate. So they made negotiation impossible by burning down all the foods and forcing everyone to accept their path of fighting against the Romans. Okay. So now the Jews are all of a sudden living in terrible, terrible famine. I'll give you another example of how bad the famine was, another story, to give you a sense of what was going on. So the same Gemara in Gittin tells a story of a very, very wealthy woman whose name was Marta Bas Baitos. She was one of the wealthiest women in Yerushalayim. Her family, one of the wealthiest women. So the Gemara says the story, she sent her servants out to go buy fine flour. They come back and they tell her there's no fine flour available anywhere on the market at no price. It doesn't exist. There's no fine flour to be bought. So she says, okay, go buy me regular flour. By the time they come back, there's no more regular flour left. From before until now, they came back and forth. All the regular flour has been bought out. The shelves, it's like pre-hurricane. There's nothing left. You're waiting for water. And by the time you got there, someone sent a message, I saw water in Sam's Club. By the time you get there, it's all gone, right? Okay. So it's all gone. So she tells the servant to go buy coarse flour. By the time he gets there, that's all gone. She tells him to buy barley flour. Barley was not really a food of wealthy people. Barley is an animal food. Go buy barley flour, and sure enough, by the time you come back, there is no flour to be bought anywhere in Jerusalem, not even barley flour. And so she says, I'm going to go myself, see what's going on. It doesn't make any sense. She didn't believe her servants. So she goes out, and she stepped on a piece of dung. Dung. She stepped on something. And she was so hungry, and she was so weak, that when she stepped on something, and she was a very refined woman. When you live a very, wealth, you don't walk out of your beautiful house, let alone walk on the streets, etc. And she stepped on this garbage, and she was in such a state of, etc., of vulnerability that she collapsed. She fainted. When she revived, she took her gold and her silver, and she says, she threw it in the streets. This is what I need gold and silver for. I can't buy food. And she threw away gold and silver, and I think she died. And the point is, this is one example of how bad was the family. The wealthiest people in Jerusalem couldn't find even barley flour. They couldn't find anything to eat. Now, the siege is going on. It's led by a man called Vespasian. He is the Roman general who is leading the siege around Jerusalem. Now, he realized he couldn't get into the city. The city was well fortified. Meantime, they built battering rams and fortresses, and they built a full, you can see like full, or Masada, you can get an idea of how they did it. Full-on cities. And the Romans built themselves a camp all around the city of Jerusalem, and they were camped. And they, time is on our side. They tried a few times breaking into the walls, battering the city. Every time they did, they lost many, many soldiers. It was very ineffective, so they stopped. And as I told you already, Jerusalem is very, very crowded. You have many, many refugees there. So it's a really, really bad situation. And after 3 years go by, I'm going to tell you a story. Things are getting really desperate. Okay, there's no food because they had food in the beginning. And the Jews weren't fighting. So now it reaches a point, it's already the end of 3 years, when they burned down the storage houses and when the famine is really bad. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of the greatest rabbis of the Talmud, realizes we need to do something. He decides he has to go and meet the emperor, the general Vespasian. He has to go negotiate. The problem is that there was no way for him to go meet Vespasian. Why not? Because as I told you, the Zealots had taken over control over the city. And even though the rabbis were on the inside of the city by the temple, But these zealots were on the lower level of the city, and they were controlling the walls. So the city of Jerusalem was not under one siege, it was actually under two sieges. The majority of Jews living in Jerusalem were being besieged twice. They were being besieged by the Romans living outside the city, and by the guard of the zealots who were inside the city, not letting anybody out. So the Jews were doubly entrapped, guarded by the zealots. Now, Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai had a nephew. His name was Abba Sikra. Abba Sikra, the nephew of Rabbi Yechanan, was a zealot, one of the zealot leaders. He was a big macher in the camp of the zealots under Shimon ben Gera. So Rabbi Yechanan calls his nephew, says, I know that you're a zealot, etc., but you need to help me. I need to get out of the city. I need you to help me escape. And so together they devise a plan. This is why I won't have time to tell the story. It's a very, very powerful story, very important story. Together, Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai and Abba Sikra devise a plan how they're going to get Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai out of the city. And they start a rumor amongst the students, and it starts going through town, that Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai is very sick and everyone should pray for him. All the Tehillim WhatsApp groups, and all the different chats, say a chapter of Tehillim for Yochanan, but I don't know what his mother's name was. And people are davening and praying for Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai for, I don't know, a few days, a week. Everyone's praying. They hear that he's very ill. He's not leaving his house. And then word gets out that Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai passed away. He stages his own death. And he pretends to die. Now, the law is that you're not allowed to bury the dead in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a holy city. The burials take place outside of the city walls. That's even though, that's the way it is. Mount of Olives is outside of the city. You can see it, but it's on the outside. So they take Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai, they put him into a coffin, and they start a funeral for Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai. They do a whole funeral, eulogies, whatever, and they start a funeral procession to bring him to be buried outside of the city. They come to the inside of the gates of the city. Forget the outside of the gates. To the inside. They got to let the zealots through. And so Abba Sikra is with his uncle. He's part of the funeral. It is his uncle after all. So he's leading the funeral. They get to the gates. And the zealot guards don't want to let Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai out. They want to check, make sure he's dead. They want to inspect the coffin. Now in Judaism, we don't open coffins. It's not respectful for the dead. It's a closed coffin. So they want to open. And Abba Sikra, who's one of them, but he's defending the honor of his uncle. So you're going to open up the coffin of the leader of the Jewish people and make like a whole thing as if start checking it, etc. It's against Jewish law. You can't do that. It would be disrespectful to our rabbi. Okay, so I say at least let us put spears through the coffin to make sure he's really dead. Like those magic tricks, like they stick swords through the box. Let's stick spears through the coffin. And again, Abba Sikra stops him and says, you can't do that. It'll be disrespectful. What will the Romans say? They'll see the coffin of the rabbi coming out with spears coming out of it. Like, how would that look to the Romans? And so they let Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai's coffin pass out of the city without being checked, without being stabbed. And he gets out of the city. And Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai is able to come to Vespasian, the Roman general leading the siege against the city of Jerusalem. He comes into the tent of Vespasian. The Gemara tells a story. I think I'm telling you now straight from the Gemara. And Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai walks in and he says, "Peace unto you, O emperor. Peace unto you, O emperor." And Vespasian says to him, "I should have you killed on two accounts. First of all, I'm not the emperor. So you're behaving with treason against the real emperor of Rome. And for that alone, you deserve to be killed. And secondly, if in your mind I'm the emperor, why did you wait 3 years to come to me? I've been sitting here for 3 years leading a siege. I'm sitting here in this tent. Oh, emperor. Yeah, where were you for the last 3 years?" At that moment, by the way, we think about this on Yom Kippur. And Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, in the Machzor, there's a note. That when we say Hamelech, you'll notice there's a note in the Machzor. It says, when you say the word, "O king," when we start the formal service, Hamelech, the king. So it says that, I don't know who it was, would think about this story of the Talmud. That if I'm the king, where were you till now? So if Hashem is the king, we're standing on Yom Kippur. HaMelech, he's the king. Oh yeah? Where were you last week and the week before? Where were you in July and August? Okay. So at that moment, a Roman guard, like a sentry, whatever, someone comes running into his tent, breathless with the news that the emperor in Rome had been assassinated. And the Roman parliament or the Senate had met and they had voted, and Vespasian had just been elected as the new emperor of Rome. He gets this news as he's sitting in front of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that had just called him the emperor. His respect for Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he knows that this is a holy man, knows what he's talking about. Now it happens to be, it's an interesting detail of the story, happens to be that at that moment when he was in the middle of talking to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and this guard came running in with the news that he had just been elected as emperor of Rome, he had been in the middle of putting on his shoes. And he had one shoe on, taking off his shoes. And one shoe was on, and one shoe was off. And all of a sudden now, he couldn't get the other shoe off. He couldn't get the other shoe off. I guess he was sitting by his couch or his desk or whatever. So he had one shoe was off, playing with it, I don't know. And one shoe was on. Now he can't get the other shoe off. He's stuck. So Yochanan ben Zakkai tells him, why can't you get your other shoe off? Because it says a verse, Shmua Tova Tadashin Etzem. It's a verse that good news makes your bones fat. You hear? Good news gives you physical pleasure. It makes your bones fat. So that's what it says in the verse. So you just heard this amazing good news that you just became the emperor of Rome. And because you heard such good news, it made your bones swell. And that's why your foot won't come off. The shoe won't come off. So he says, so what should I do about it? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, bring someone in front of you that you really don't like, and you'll see this person that really gets under your skin and really annoys you standing in front of you. It'll make your bone go back to regular. So they brought some guy that he hated. I don't know, one of his prisoners or someone that made him upset. They brought an enemy of Vespasian before him. He saw this person. His bone went back and he's able to take the other shoe off. Okay. So now he says to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, ask for whatever you want. What do you want? Now you came all the way here. What do you want? So Yochanan ben Zakkai asked for three things. Gemara says he asked for three things. Number one, he asked, I don't remember the order, he asked for the city of Yavne. The city of Yavne was a city up in the north of Israel, far away from the military campaign and the war and all that. And there were scholars there. He said, allow the city of Yavne and the sages of Yavne, the Chachamim, the wise men there, to be allowed to live in peace, and promise that even when you destroy Jerusalem, because he saw Jerusalem being destroyed, even when you win the war, allow Yavne to be untouched. There should be a safe space for the scholars to continue learning Torah, despite what happens here in Jerusalem. Secondly, he asked for the family of the Rabbi Gamliel, who was the prince of the Jewish people. So we know that the dynasty of David HaMelech has to continue. So he asked that Rabbi Gamliel, who was then the spiritual leader, or the political leader of the Jewish people, not the zealots, he was more moderate, but that he should be allowed to live, him and his family should be given safe passage. And number three, there was a very, very holy man, his name was Rabbi Tzadok, who had been fasting every single day for the city of Jerusalem to survive. And because he'd been fasting so much, his body became very, very weak, and he was very weak and near death. Please give doctors to heal Rabbi Tzadok. And Vespasian agrees to all three requests. To give the city of Yavne, to give safe passage to the leader, Rabbi Gamliel, and his family, and to heal Rabbi Tzadok. Now, of course, when you hear the story, what's the obvious question? Yeah, what about Jerusalem? You just inspired, you just blew up the mind of this Vespasian by impressing with this amazing, quote-unquote coincidence, divine miracle, where he said, peace unto you, O emperor, literally a minute before he found. You told him he was an emperor before he knew he was an emperor. Like you broke the news to him before the news was broken to him. You could have asked for anything you wanted. And you could have gotten Jerusalem. You should have convinced Vespasian that the Jews don't want to fight, that it's only a small group of zealots that are fighting, and to somehow make peace. He didn't do that. And then the Gemara brings, this is a great debate amongst the rabbis, if Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did good or not. Some say that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had a logical plan. And he felt that if you ask for too much, you know what you get? Nothing. If he would have gone all in on Jerusalem, now Vespasian has just been 3 years besieging Jerusalem. What's the chances that Vespasian is going to say, okay, fine, no problem, I'm going home. War's over. Not going to happen. So he didn't want to shoot for the stars, and then you get rejected. What do you get? Nothing. And there's a lot of discussion about the wisdom of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that he was able to recognize how the future of Judaism will survive. The future of Judaism would not survive, would survive even without a temple. Even if Jerusalem would be destroyed, and even if the Beis Hamikdash would be destroyed, if we would have the sages of Yavne, if we would have the sages of the Torah studying and continuing the Torah, Judaism will survive. Gemara also brings that this was all part of God's plan, that God wanted him to not think of asking for Jerusalem because Jerusalem was meant to be destroyed. That was the plan of Hashem, and that Judaism would continue through the Torah and in exile. But that's the story. So, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai gets these three things. He, I guess, goes to Yavne. Vespasian goes back to Rome. He's now the Roman emperor. And his son, Titus, becomes a new general in charge of the war against Jerusalem. Heard of Titus? In Hebrew, Titus. So yeah, Titus. And Titus, he starts full-fledged again. He already understands that the Jews are in desperation. I guess his spies already heard that they burnt down all the storage houses, and the Jews are hungry, and the Jews are desperate, and they had totally cut off all the supplies. And as people were so desperate, they tried to escape, and they were caught and killed. People realized that people are just leaving the city because they're so desperate. And so Titus again starts battering the city and starting to do what he can to actually conquer the city, not just to wait. And they make new battering rams. And finally, on the 17th of Tammuz, Shiva Asar Tammuz, is the day that the Romans breached the walls of Jerusalem. Okay? Now they breached the walls of the outer walls, there's different levels of walls. From then they were fighting. From when they breached the walls of Jerusalem until they worked their way, they fought and fought and fought until they reached the Temple Mount. It took 3 weeks of fighting. But not 3 weeks, like we'll do a little bit today. 3 weeks of nonstop fighting house to house, street to street, village to village. The number of people killed was in the tens of hundreds of thousands. I'm going to tell you at the end, the number of killed will be over 1 million people killed during this period. Not just 3 weeks, but over 1 million people killed, according to Josephus. Hundreds of thousands of Jews are killed during these 3 weeks. It says that so many Jews were killed that the streets of Jerusalem were flowing with blood like a river. You walked outside, there was a river of blood. That's how bad the fighting and the massacres were as the Romans fought. And of course, the Zealots fought with all they had. They didn't just surrender the city. They refused to surrender the city. They were going to fight till the end. And so from the 17th of Tammuz, the war is at its worst because they've gotten through the city. You're talking about tens upon tens of thousands of Roman soldiers in these small little streets and these small little, cobblestone coming in, fighting and fighting, moving closer to the Antonia fortress and the Temple Mount. So if you know the geography of the Temple Mount, Herod had built in the year 35 BCE, he built a huge fortress next to the Temple Mount. Okay, first of all, we'll go back with me. Temple Mount was the highest point of Jerusalem. Today, when you go to Temple Mount, it's not so impressive. You know why? Because after the Romans conquered it, they raised it. They didn't just destroy the building. They actually destroyed the entire Temple Mount. The Temple Mount we have today is not what it was before the Roman destruction. It was a much, much higher mountain. They literally took down the whole mountain. They took down all the retaining walls of the mountain. Let me explain something. When you go to the Western Wall today, you ever been to the Western Wall? If you haven't, you've been there? Okay. So you come to the Western Wall is not a wall of the temple. It's not a wall of the temple. It was a retaining. Today we live in Coral Springs, right? You have canals, and you have dirt near canals. And if you don't have any, sometimes you have dirt, and what happens? Dirt slides away, and all of a sudden your property starts to diminish. You have like in California, right? You have these beautiful homes on the sides of mountains and cliffs, And then, whoops, one day, the mountain slid away, and this is goodbye to your home and just join the ocean. It's so that was when Herod built this massive building up on the top that was so big, and he built a fortress, and he built an area for the non-Jews to come to watch and to view, and all the different the court and the stables. He built a massive complex on Temple Mount. I want to be very, very high. So he built retaining walls outside of the ground that the Temple Mount was on top of, just to hold it, that it shouldn't slide. Fascinating. And so if the western wall is first of all, it's huge. It goes much deeper down. It also goes, if you've ever done the tunnel tours, you walk along those walls for like 20, 30 minutes. I don't know the exact dimensions of how long that wall is off the top of my head. I'm sure if you Google it, we'll find that in a minute. But you walk down those things. It's huge. It's huge. That's all that's left, that side of what was the bottom, the base of the Temple Mount. The other three sides were completely razed to the ground. Those walls were destroyed. So if you look at the other side, there's nothing. I'm saying this is like the high point. The western wall is a high point. It was the only one that wasn't destroyed. Everything else was lower than that. Just to give you an idea of, so the Temple Mount was way up, a very, very fortified situation. And it's not just Temple Mount. You had this fortress called the Antonia Fortress, built by Herod as a fortress to protect the Temple Mount. The kings lived there, etc. And so it was on the rocky encampment on the northwestern corner of the Temple Mount. So the western wall, you know where the western wall is, right? So that's the side where Antonia was on the north. So our side is the south side. So it's the other. Okay. Now, obviously, if Rome could take this fortress, they have the whole city, because that fortress is at the highest point of the city, in the middle of the city, Temple Mount, the fortress on top. And so the defenders are fighting desperately in the actual temple, in Temple Mount, trying to stop the Romans from getting to this fortress. So what had been a holy place where the Jews have spent 420 years coming in a state of holiness and purity and spirituality, to bring gifts, to bring to Hashem, to offer to Hashem, to pray to Hashem. Now it's literally a battleground. And as the Jews are being repressed, the Romans are fighting from the wall. What's their goal? When they breach the walls, what is their goal? Temple Mount. That is their goal. They're not fighting, let me just actually clarify, they're not fighting to conquer the whole city. I mean, they are. But the way you conquer the city is by you go to the fortress. You get to the heart of the city, then you have the city. Then you clean up afterwards. But you fight for control, for domination. Which means that it was 3 weeks. Just think about how long does it take to walk from the entrance you enter the old city of Jerusalem to get to the Temple Mount? 20 minutes, half hour? I don't know if that's exactly where the walls were, where Herod was there, because the walls of today is from Soleimani. It's from many years later. Let's say a little bigger. I don't know exactly where the walls were. An hour. It took 3 weeks to get that distance. Just to understand how intense the battles were. Just to give you an idea of what kind of battles we're talking about.
And everybody fought just as zealous.
Everyone was fighting. At this point, everyone was fighting. There was no, even if you weren't fighting, the Romans were killing everyone. The Romans killed anyone they saw. They were murdering. They went from home to home as they were going, murdering, looting, burning, absolute bloodshed. There was no compassion allowed for the Jewish people at this point. When they conquered the city, the idea, the goal of Titus was to raise the city to the ground. The Jews had become such a thorn and such a obstacle to the Roman vision of greatness. And for 3 years, first of all, much more than 3 years, the Jews had been a problem for Rome for many years. And this whole Roman rebellion and with Flores and all that was many years that the Romans were fighting to reconquer Israel and Jerusalem. And it was such a hard fight. The official military objective of this war was to destroy Jerusalem, to destroy it. And of course, the battles, the hand-to-hand fighting for the heart of Yerushalayim around, and the main fighting was by Temple Mount. That's where the real fighting was, not just the streets going up there. Like the Romans got to Temple Mount, and the Jews are fighting inside Temple Mount, stopping the Romans from getting into Temple Mount and into the Antonia Fortress. And as I said to you, the streets were flowing with blood. Flowing. Okay. Now, finally, at one point, here we have the Gemara and Gittin tells us, that finally the Romans broke through. There was a lot of different opinions exactly what happened next, how the fire started. Before that, it says that Titus broke into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He came into the Holy of Holies with terrible arrogance and desecration. And he actually did terrible things in the Holy of Holies to show that he won against the God of the Jewish people. And then at some point, someone lit a fire. It's not clear who it is. According to Josephus, the Romans did not want to destroy the temple. They wanted to keep it and plunder it. Some say that a Roman officer did it by him. He was holding a fire to see it, and the fire went in. Some say that the Jews lit the fire. It's not even exactly clear who exactly lit the fire. It's a big matter of debate, who you ask. Regardless, the point is, at some point on the 9th of Av, the temple was set aflame. The temple was set aflame. And as the temple began to burn in the center of Jewish life, in the place where we had prayed and davened and all that, many Jews threw themselves into the fires of the temple. Many, many Jews committed suicide by going into the fires of the temple. And the other choice was to be captured and taken as a prisoner of the Romans, which was worse. The Romans were barbaric. They took prisoners, either as slaves or they fed them to the lions. They used them as gladiators and put them in galley ships to be tied to oars for the rest of their life, rowing a ship across the ocean. That's what the Romans did with their slaves. The Romans didn't treat slaves. The slaves in Rome were literally cattle tied to a galley, or used as sport if they weren't strong enough to. Once they weren't strong enough to work, then they were used as sport. And the fire burned it started on Tisha B'Av, and it burned through till the next day. The fire was so big, it kept on burning till the 10th day of Av, which is why many of the laws of the morning of Tisha B'Av, like not eating meat, not listening to music, not taking haircuts, all of those sad, well, it's not just Tisha B'Av, but all the sadness of Tisha B'Av, although we're allowed to eat, the fast ends on the night of Tisha B'Av. Many of the other laws of mourning and of the sadness of the 9 days continues till the afternoon of the 10th day. So till Friday afternoon, Friday midday. And as I said already before, according to Josephus, the total number of dead killed during this siege and destruction was 1,100,000, and 97,000 that were taken as prisoners of Rome. Understand the destruction that took place. Over 1 million Jews are killed in this time. People, the destruction of the temple. It's not just the destruction of the temple. This is the destruction of the heart of Israel, the resistance of Israel, I wouldn't even call it the independence of Israel we talked about last week. It was lost last week. This is the destruction of any sense of independence in any form, of having a temple of religious independence in the land of Israel. The Zealot leaders were captured alive because they were fighting. They were brought to Roman chains where they were displayed in this triumphal procession. Titus made a huge procession. They came back with the loot and the plunders, etc., whatever he took from the temple before it was burnt. He made the famous Ark of Titus. I've been to Rome and you see the Ark of Titus showing the victory parade that Titus made when he came back to Rome with all of this wealth that he plundered from the temple before it was burnt down to the ground. As I said, they burnt down the temple. Again, it's not clear officially. Josephus claims the Romans didn't want to burn it down. Most people say they did want to burn it down. He burnt down the temple. He didn't just burn the temple. He destroyed the entire Temple Mount. It was all the bricks were thrown down of the walls. I mean, the retaining walls. All the retaining walls were deliberately razed to the ground. All the bricks were thrown down. They then took all the land and they pushed it out and they plowed it. It's one of the prophecies that Zion will be plowed like a field. Temple Mount was literally turned into fields that were plowed over. Nothing should ever be rebuilt there ever again. Total desolation. Yeah, that's what they did to this to the thing. Now, Titus himself, it's a fascinating story. Titus himself, this Roman emperor, Roman general, who was so proud of himself that he conquered the land of the Jews and the temple of the God of the Jews, and he heard some of these stories of the God of the Jews. Now he destroyed him. So he cursed God. In the Holy of Holies, he cursed God. He said, like, oh, look, your temple is being destroyed. What are you going to do about it? He gets into the boat to go back to Rome. with all of the wealth and everything he had taken. And all of a sudden, there's a storm at sea. And Titus says, I see that this God can only fight on the ocean, but not on dry land. He destroys whenever someone sins. The story of Noah and the flood, the Egyptians. How did he destroy the Egyptians? In the ocean. He drowned them in the ocean. This is a God who only has power at sea, but he has no power on dry land. And Titus mocks God and says, if you want to prove your power, God, come fight me on dry land. Immediately the water stopped. The storm stopped. Titus made it onto dry land. When he came onto dry land, as he stepped into the dry land, a mosquito or fly flew up his nostril and into his brain. A little gnat, it's called a gnat, G-N-A-T. Little bug flew up his nostrils as soon as he stepped on the dry land. It happened after he was off the ship. And this little bug went up his nose and began pecking at his brain. And here he was with this bug in his brain, pecking away. And it says that he couldn't get the thing to stop. Couldn't get the thing to stop until one day he passed by and was pecking at his brain. Until one day he was walking by a blacksmith. He heard the blacksmith banging so loud, when they're banging the metal, the noise of the banging of the blacksmith took away the banging inside his head. So they told this blacksmith, "Come, I want you to come to my office, to my palace. I want you to bang on metal all day, so I won't hear the sound of the thing." And for 7 years it pecked, and then he got this relief from the banging, but only for a short while. And then it stopped, etc., and the pain came back. And for 7 years, Titus had this bug inside his brain, inside his head, pecking at his brain, until he went crazy. He went insane. He went crazy. And when he died, they opened his brain. I think that the gnat was like the size of a bird or something inside of his skull, something like that. And then he said they should burn his ashes and sprinkle him over the sea so the God of the Jews could not bring him to judgment. Meaning he realized that he had cursed the God of the Jews, and that's why he got this bug inside him. Imagine literally a bug living inside your skull. Can you imagine that kind of torture? And he asked that when he dies, that his ashes should be scattered over the seas, so that God should not be able to find his body and get revenge on him after his death. So an interesting story. Okay, now after this, Rome is destroyed. Jerusalem is destroyed. However, what we have to understand is two things. First of all, is the simple thing: it's not the end of the Jews living in Judea, of the Jews living in Israel. There's still Jews living in Israel, and the Jews will still fight. And that's how we have the story of Masada. There were Jews living in the land of Israel. 1 million Jews, 1.1 million Jews were murdered. Jerusalem was killed, but the people living outside. So Jerusalem was full of refugees from all over, but not every single city in Jerusalem and in all of Israel have been destroyed. There's still a whole country. Jerusalem was the main fight, the main siege. They were pillaging. They were on their way, but there were other cities that. So you can see, and that's we're not going to have a class next week. I will not be here next week, unfortunately. But then we'll continue. If we do the week after that, I don't know yet. But the week after, we'll see not so much the story of Masada, but the story of Beitar, and the story of Bar Kokhba, which is another amazing story. The last revolt of the Jewish people, the last fight against Rome. So at this point, Rome completely controls Israel, but the spirit of the Jewish people is still not broken fully. That's just let you know this is more to come as a teaser. But the other point, and this is the real takeaway point, is that this is what the Gemara tells us. That the reason why the second temple was destroyed is because the Jews couldn't get along with each other. Which means that long before the Jewish people, long before the Romans came, and long before we were besieged, we had already began our own destruction. How? By fighting with each other. By fighting with each other. And so we don't say Rome destroyed the temple. I mean, Rome did destroy the temple. But you know what really destroyed? What did Thomas say? What destroyed the temple? We did. Exactly. Our infighting destroyed the temple. Rome was the vehicle by which God made it happen. So yes, technically, logistically, the ones that did the will of God were the Romans. But the reason, the why, that's the how. How was the temple destroyed? The Romans. Why was the temple destroyed? Because we were fighting with each other. We couldn't get along with each other. And so long before there was the Romans, long before Israel was besieged on the outside, Jerusalem was besieged on the outside, we were already destroying each other on the inside. And this is, so when you know the sickness, you know the cure. You know the sickness, you know the cure. If the reason why the temple was destroyed was because of the hatred, the fighting that existed between the Jewish people, which began as political disagreements. We have a political disagreement. Rome is terrorizing us. They're taxing us. The Roman governors are too tough. How do we deal with it? Should we make peace with the Romans? Should we negotiate with the Romans and try to get a better, governor? Or should we fight? Both legitimate political opinions. But the moment that those political differences became deep hatred for each other and became hatred that would become not just, it's called senseless hatred. Why is it senseless? There was a reason why they hate each other. I hate you because I think you're destroying the land of Israel. I hate you because I think you're not standing up for the Jewish people. But it was hate. It was senseless because it had no limits. It became a hate that was beyond the disagreement. It was just a hate of the other. What's the solution? How do we bring Mashiach back? How do we bring back the temple? Senseless love. Love not for a reason. Not because you're a good person, because you're a nice person, I love you. But simply because you're my brother, you're my sister. That's the only reason I love. Why do you love your sister? Just because. You don't need a reason why to love your family. If you need a reason why to love your sister, to love your brother, something is wrong. You don't need a reason why I love my brother. He's my brother. And that's how every single Jew needs to feel to every single one of our brothers and sisters. We love you, and therefore, when we have pure love, senseless love, that's what will bring the temple back. As I'll just end up with the famous, beautiful saying from Elie Wiesel, that Adolf Hitler, Yimach Shemai, he searched after every Jew with hate, with evil. And the Rebbe taught us to search for every single Jew with love. And with love is how we're going to bring back the third temple, finally, God willing, very, very soon, even before this year, Tisha B'Av. Okay, thank you all very, very much. Eric, I don't understand your question. Really? Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone. After last week's class, Marie says, I looked up a little bit of what you were discussing, and Jewish history was completely shocked that after the destruction of the temple for around 1,800 years or so, Jewish people did not have where to call home till 1948. Aha. Okay. She doesn't understand why it's been so long. 1,800 years is a long time to be a wandering Jewish people. So, Marie, that's why, what's his name? The Dalai Lama, fascinating story from Marie, a little bonus story. Dalai Lama was like the head of the Tibetan Indians. And he was, not Indians, Chinese. The Chinese kicked him out of, basically China is a communist country. So I don't remember the years off the top of my head, but at some point he was exiled from China. He ended up in Tibet or wherever he ended up in exile. And over the years, I guess the followers of whatever his exact religion is were diminishing. At one point, he asked to have a meeting with several leading rabbis, including, I think, Rabbi Lau, who was a former chief rabbi of Israel. And he basically wanted to understand, how does a nation survive in exile out of home? He understood that the Jews are the only people that managed to do this, that they were exiled from their homeland, and they survived, they kept their destiny. And he's also exiled, and he sees that it's falling apart, that the next generation is not feeling the same fire as the original exiles, there was original group felt. Anyway, yeah. I don't know, that's a different conversation. The point, I have to go to another class for that. Art, thank you very much. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Eric, I still don't understand your question, what it really is. Okay. Unless you're asking Marie why we didn't go back earlier, we didn't have the ability to. We were not able to go back earlier. I mean, that's political realities. Okay, even 1948 had many, many miracles to make it happen. It's not so simple. It'll be another set of classes on the history of how Jews got back to Israel. Okay, anyway, my friends, next week, so two things. Next week, there's no class, but next week, Wednesday night is Tisha B'Av. I will be back for Tisha B'Av. I'm going to New York. My son is putting on film for the first time. Next Monday, I'm going for a simcha. Just FYI, next Monday, Mayo will be putting on film for the first time. He's in camp. So our custom do it 2 days, 2 months exactly before his birthday. So I'm going to fly up to the camp that I spent many summers in as a camper and 2 summers as a counselor in. I haven't been there in, I don't know, 20 years. I should figure out exactly how many years. More, what 20 years? 25 years? Last time I was there, I was 17. I'm 41, so do the math. So it's a long time ago. So I'm going up on Monday. I'm going before, but I'm going on Monday. Monday morning, I'll be in the Catskills with my son, Padegan Fellows. That's what I'll be next Monday. But Tisha B'Av is Wednesday night. The schedule was in the email. We'll send out another email with that as well. Probably next week. There'll be Eicha here in Shul on Wednesday night at, I think, 8:45. Sit on the floor, we'll read the Book of Lamentations. And then Thursday, 10 o'clock is services, followed by the reading of Lamentations. And there'll be some ongoing conversations and discussion. We'll talk about them, followed by a special video. I will probably stream on Facebook the Eicha last year. I'll stream it live because you don't have to make a blessing on it. So you can do it on Facebook. So I'll probably stream live Wednesday night at, I think it's 8:45. Book of Eicha, and y'all, God willing, won't have to sit on the floor and warm, but if we do, you're all welcome to join us. Okay, my friends, Laila Tov. God bless you. Okay. Thank you for the Mazel Tov, Joe.